Good afternoon, you data monkeys. Well, I think we have some data today that needs to be revisited in order we can understand what is it that controls today's Jesuits. Is it the same force that controlled it from the beginning? Or did it get handed over to something else? That is the quandary I think we would be served well to better understand. So, what's important in relation to the Jesuits is that during the 1700s they were slowly thrown out of European countries and European colonies, so South America as well. Now, we all know why the Jesuits were set up. They were set up to counter the Reformation. So obviously their perceived enemy was anything Reformed. So Protestantism, Lutheranism, all the branches that make up the idea of a Protestant or protesting body of people against what was ridiculous behaviour by the then Vatican. Bearing in mind the Vatican is controlled by the Holy See, so we're looking at perhaps that causing the actual schism in the first place, which did serve Rome the Empire very well. Now, what people don't realise is there's two Romes, and there always has been two Romes, but they've been merged one way or another each time to attack the other and protect the works of either one. So you've got Byzantium, which originally was Constantinople. That was Rome the Empire. That was the seat of Rome, as we understand Rome when we're looking back in the old films, etc. And the church was basically set up in the monasteries, the abbeys, as it were. And they fell out at a time before in the 9th, the 11th century. So their schism then broke apart. Now it's important that we understand that the Byzantium Church, which is the Eastern Orthodox Church of Russia today, it operates the Greek canon. It doesn't operate under the Roman canon, it operates under the Greek canon. So there you see the Hellenistic input into what was Byzantium Christendom, or Rome, the Empire, and it differed with the one created in Rome itself. So we have a distinction between the Eastern Orthodox, which incorporates all the Eastern churches, and Rome in Europe, which is the holder of all the titles in the West, which is why it's important. Now, it's difficult sometimes to work out which side has took over which. However, there are pointers to show that both camps were being taken over by one particular idea. Now, the ideas in Byzantium were twofold. You had the Macedonian input, which believed in the system whereby you include the peasantry, etc., in commerce, in trade, etc., so that you can tax them. And taxing the peasantry gives the state more money. It creates a bigger industry and trade and money, etc., in the nation as a whole. So in essence, including all strata of society, right down to the man on the street, is the Macedonian way. The opposing force, which you could accredit to what we know as Talmudic. Now, what they believed in was a super rich aristocracy and nothing for the peasantry. Their idea was that if we own everything, we don't have to pay any tax. Therefore, there is no state. So you have a nation run by an oligarchy of the wealthy, who are also the state. They are also the law, etc. So those are the two camps that we had in Byzantium. Now you can see that by at least the 11th century, the latter idea of feudalism, feudal lords, landowning elect, took over what was built in Western European Christendom, and the feudal system that they created during the 10th century rather, and then launched onto England under William I, who was supported openly by the Jewish contingent in France. And he, by the royal decree, allowed usury in England and also in France from that invasion. So there's two distinct paths and patterns. Now, back to what the subject matter, which is who the hell are the Jesuits? Especially, who are they since they fell out of favour with the kingdoms, as it were, in Western Rome and the colonies. So we need to understand something about Russia in the 1700s. So we'll start that with the takeover of the Russian throne by a woman called Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst. Now, these are bloodlines. These are high-level Prussian bloodlines. Now, her family itself wasn't that wealthy, but the outer family was, and they'd already decided as a youngster that this girl was going to be brought up to marry somebody very powerful. So that's what was basically going on there. So she was born in 1729, and she was called Sophie of Anhalt-Zerbst, but became known as Catherine the Great. She was Empress of Russia from 1762. So her family had achieved the intention, which was to have this girl marry somebody important. And in 1762, she took over from her husband Peter III, who became the Emperor of Russia. And he was only actually the Emperor for 6 months. Now, the coup against him was said to be carried out by his wife Catherine and a guards officer, Alexei Grigorievich Orlov, and it was basically a takeover for personal reasons. There's a lot of shenanigans going on when you look into who Peter was, what his policies were, etc., etc. But one thing you can't get away from is this woman, Catherine, was the means to an end of basically taking over Russia by these bloodlines in Prussia. And this was achieved through Catherine. Now, Catherine was born in Altsatyn, Pomerania, which is now, it was a kingdom of Prussia and it's now Poland, a part of Poland, as Princess Sophie Friederike August von Anhalt-Zerbst-Dornberg. Her father, Christian August, Prince of Anhalt-Zerbst, belonged to the ruling family, German family of Anhalt, but held the rank of Prussian general in his capacity of governor of the city of Stettin. Princess Sophie's father, a devout German Lutheran, so we can see that we're talking about the Reformed houses in Germany under the Lutheran theology. He actually opposed his daughter's conversion to the Eastern Orthodoxy. So obviously she'd been brought up a Lutheran, but she was entering into the Eastern Orthodoxy. But despite his objection, on the 20th of June 1744, she entered the Russian Orthodox Church and was received as a member with a new name of Catherine Yekaterina. Okay. And the artificial patronymic Alexeyevna, or daughter Olevexi, whatever that means. It must be important to these people, they like that kind of stuff. So on the following day, the formal betrothal took place to Peter von Holstein-Gottorp. So this is your Peter III, who would become Duke of Holstein-Gottorp, and that's located in the northwest of present-day Germany, near the border with Denmark, hence the Holstein. In 1739, in 1762, Peter succeeded to the throne as Emperor Peter III, and Catherine became Empress consort. So at this point now, these Prussian bloodlines have achieved their woman in the thick of Russian imperial power. But he only lasted 6 months, and it's claimed that he was arrested, etc., and he was in prison, and he died basically. But basically, it was just a takeover, and Catherine was the pivotal power point for these Prussian families. Now, Catherine recalled in her memoirs that as soon as she arrived in Russia, she fell ill with pleuritis that almost killed her. She credited her survival to the frequent bloodletting. In a single day, she had 4 phlebotomies. Her mother was opposed to this practice and fell into the Empress's disfavour. So she'd basically fallen out with her family, it would appear. When Catherine's situation looked desperate, her mother wanted her confessed by a Lutheran pastor. Awakening from her delirium, however, Catherine said, "I don't want any Lutheran, I want my Orthodox father." So Catherine's pretty well seated into the Orthodox father. She's making it pretty obvious to all and sundry that she no longer sees herself as a Lutheran. So this is what I think is quite important we need to understand. I would suggest that it was full-on Lutheran, this. Based on the fact that also at this time the Hanoverians have took over Britain. They have a special property built for them just off Covent Garden, which was called the Adelphi House. And when you enter into that arena, everything about that system is Greek. Adelphi House being the key evidence of that fact. But everything in relation to the esoteric occult knowledge based around the Adelphi House is Greek. So we can see there a tie between what we've been classed as supreme Protestant houses, in fact being something else altogether. This is how important this move is, because you've not only got Catherine in Russia taking over this position, but 2 of her cousins became the King of Sweden as Gustav III, then Charles the 13th. So you can see that this move not just into Russia, it's also into Sweden. It's also into Britain. So this is a big move by these Prussian houses operating under the Reformed ideology. But it's something else altogether that's going on here, and I can assure you that is the case. They're just using Protestantism as the cover back in this day. Which you have to do to be accepted as power people, claiming to be opposing Rome, as it were. Now, on her accession to power and rule of the empire, Catherine often relied on her nobles, and she had favourites. And most notably, we had Count Grigory Orlov and Grigory Potemkin. I'm probably not pronouncing these Russian names correctly, but I do apologise. And she was assisted by highly successful generals such as Alexander Suvorov and Pyotr Ramyantsev, and admirals such as Fyodor Yushakov. She governed at a time when the Russian Empire was expanding rapidly by conquest and diplomacy. So this again is very important that we understand what's actually going on in Russia at this time. Basically what Russia is doing at this time is expanding itself to become a power, and to do that it had to take over all the Crimea in order to get power to the Black Sea, so it had access to the Mediterranean, okay, or the Black Sea, which connects to the Mediterranean. Now, so at the time that Catherine now has been put into power, all the military forces, which are Prussian, and of course you're dealing with Hessian here now, so you're dealing with mercenaries, they then expanded Russian territory. Now, this is where it gets rather interesting, because today the Eastern Orthodox, the Russian Orthodox Church, is being presented as the real idea of Christianity. Now, let's bear in mind that we've got all this going on here, which preempts what happens with the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks annihilated all the Russian Christians in their time period up to Stalin, and Stalin expanded that again. Imported all the Mongol races, which ties into the Byzantium link again. But it also, what they actually also did. So, well, let's not go ahead of myself here. So, in respect of this expansion of the Russian territory in the 1700s, this is what they were doing. So it says, in the south, the Crimean Khanate. Did you get that? Khazaria. Okay. All these non-Semitic Jews, okay, of a self-claim rather than being genetic. There's no genetic tie to this area of the Crimea, okay, the steppes of Russia, which is where the Khazarians come from. So, in the 1700s, let's get this into your minds again. Russia, under Catherine, the Prussian leadership, crushed the Crimea Khanate. Crushed it. That means that area, Khazaria, was under full Russian control, which was Prussian German houses in the 1700s. Okay? Can you see that? So the Ashkenazi, the Khazars, were under the control of the Russian emperor, which meant the Prussian families in the 1700s. Okay? At the same time, the Red Shield, the Rothschilds are being brought to the fore, which is the shielding of the Red Path of the Kabbalah. That's what they're shielding. That's another story. But this is where we're going to start to move this stuff eventually into the esoteric, so that you can understand what it is that's at the top of this tree. So the victory, the crushing of the Crimean Khanate followed victories over the Ottoman Empire. There were the Russo-Turkish Wars, and Russia colonized the territories of Novorossiya along the coast of the Black and Azov Seas. In the west, it was the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth that they took over, and that was ruled by Catherine's former lover, King Stanislav August Poniatowski. So can you see this is a Prussian move into Russia and then expanding across the Crimea? And it was eventually partitioned. So that area, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, was partitioned, and it was the Russian Empire that gained the largest share of the land in that takeover. Now, in the east, Russia started to colonize Alaska. So this is when Alaska was being colonized by the Russians. Okay. You've also got to bear in mind that America, at the time of the Second World War, 54% of the population were of German descent. We're dealing here with Prussian houses. Took over Russia, into Alaska. Can you see they've got the... Right? So this is... Okay. And they also, more importantly, control the Khazarians in the 1700s. It's very important that we get this. Now, let's just have a look at the Crimean Khanate. So it's called the Crimean Tartar. Now, at the moment, you've got the Russians trying to claim that they were Tartaria. This body of information shows you clearly that they took over that landmass, destroyed all the Russian Christians, and brought in all these Khanate people that they took over in the 1700s. So, but that came at the Bolshevik Revolution. So we had all the works going on from the 1700s under Catherine the Great, leading up to the Bolshevik Revolution, whereby they could remove the Russians, the real Russian people, and bring in all these, what are they classing as Tartarians today, as though they were a Russian empire and that Russia's the victim here. Nonsense. If you actually studied the Tartars, back in the day, they claimed that the Russians were the enemy, and so were the British under the Rothschilds. All right. So they were the two enemies of the Tartars back in the day. Now, so this is the Khanate is the continuation of what was the Great Horde. So we're talking going back to Genghis Khan, who was a ginger guy with green eyes. Probably a Cohen. Yeah, probably called George Cohen. Something like that. You know, Genghis, where you get... So you got to go Germanic. Yeah, so that's probably, he was probably called George Cohen. And he led the hordes of the Mongols, etc., closer to Europe. Anyway, we'll not get into that. He was also known as Little Tartary. And it existed from 1441 to 1783, which is when the Russians invaded it and took it over. And it was the Turkic... It was the longest lived of the Turkic Khanates that succeeded the empire of the Golden Horde. And it was established by Hassi I Giray in 1441 and was regarded as the direct heir to the Golden Horde and to Desti Kipchak. Okay. Its common languages are Turkey, Old Crimean, Tatar, Ottoman and Turkish. Religion is Islam today, so now you can understand why Islam is heavily involved in this Zionist nonsense, or at least the Kafir part. The Kafir aspect of what's taking over Islam is a part of that, as is Christian Zionism in relation to Christendom. So that's your Mormons, your Scientologists, your Jehovah's Witnesses, and your Freemasons. Your witches, your New Age operators, because you're all operating on the inverted Kabbalah. It doesn't matter who you are, what organisation you're in, you've been operating on the inverted Kabbalah since John Dee. Which is why you've built this we have today instead of that, what you thought you were building. So that's all your Masons, all of you. You know, you are the clowns to continue to operate in Kabbalah magic because it's inverted. Everything you set off to do, the opposite will be, the feed will go back to the priesthood, etc. But that's another story. Now, in 1783, so the reason why they attacked the Khanate was because they said it violated the 1774 Treaty of Kukak-Kanyarka, which had guaranteed non-interference of both Russia and the Ottoman Empire in the affairs of the Crimean Khanate. So the Russian Empire annexed the Khanate. So that's what caused it. And among the European powers, there was only France that came out in open protest against this act. Now that's interesting because France obviously was Catholic then. So all the so-called Protestant nations didn't say a murmur. Now that's an interesting point to note as well. So these Prussian houses have certainly enamoured the Brits and a big large part German and Russia into this idea that these Prussian houses are in fact Protestant. They're not, they're actually, this is your Byzantium Comnines. Okay, this is your House Comnene, who you could say was the last Byzantine emperors who basically, I would suggest, handed it over to the Islamic friends back in the day and operated the empire from Armenia back then. They don't need to do that now. They're all over the shop, and especially all over Britain. Catherine reformed the administration of Russian governates, right? So it's government departments, and many new cities and towns were founded on her orders. An admirer of Peter the Great, who was the Peter that came before Peter III, his mother was the daughter of Peter I. So it comes down to that. These are Romanovs. Okay, this is your Romanovs. Okay, now very interesting here because with the death of Peter III, the last Romanov, Catherine claiming that she sired no children with him because he was a bit of a fruit bat. The Romanov line ended with Peter III. So the Romanovs that we are aware of that became Nicholas II weren't Romanovs. They were only Romanovs through this Catherine claiming the name. So they weren't actually bloodline Romanovs. So who were these people? You know, there's a game gone on here to pretend that the Romanovs ended with Peter III in the 1700s. It's important that another piece that people need to understand, because you can take that on board and it will change your chronologies, it will change your ancestry stuff. So, and admirer of Peter the Great, Catherine continued to modernise Russia along Western European lines. However, military conscriptions and the economy continued to depend on serfdom, and an increase in demands of the state and of the private landowners intensified the exploitation of serf labour. So you can see even Russia at that time had taken up the feudal system that was said to be of Rome, You see, what I'm seeing in all this is they've allowed Vatican and Rome to build up the titles that we all are under, and then the Byzantine Roman Empire itself, Rome the Empire, has come in. It's reformed Christianity in the 900s in the monasteries through the Carolingians, changed the rules of Benedictine doctrine on land ownership, and it's been a slow incremental changeover, so that the Byzantium Greek system, the Hellenistic system, slowly becomes the Vatican system through its control, the control of the Holy See, the families behind the Holy See, all merchants. Most of them claim their ancestry from Iran. Most of them are Jewish, or claim Jewish ancestry, forgive me. So you can see this move on top of Europe by this Byzantium oddity, which is why there's an Islamic tie to the Templar Jesuit secret society stuff. The rebellions actually were a big cause because she carried on the serf labour, etc., and including the large-scale Pugachev rebellion of Cossacks and peasants, which the script for Tartaria uses profoundly to make it out like Pugachev represented the Tartaria. I would suggest Pugachev just represented the old Russia, the original Russia, and that Catherine, all this nonsense, and the reason why Russia and the Brits were classed as enemies of Tartar was because they were actually enemies of Christianity itself. So they were, slowly removing the Russian Christians as well. Because let's remember, before the Reformation, if you were a Christian, you were a Catholic. Not because that's just how it was. Through the Reformation, all the non-Hebrew traditions got in and just started to mish it up. The Enlightenment, which again Catherine supported, big supporter of the Enlightenment. So this is Masonic, this is Templar Rosicrucian. So you can see that the Prussian houses have got into Britain, they've got into Russia, and now they're expanding their power across Europe, across Russia, across the Crimea. Okay, got to bear in mind at this point, the Jesuits up to this point have opened up routes into China, into India, across the entire globe. So the Jesuits as an operation are falling foul at this time of the Catholic Western European monarchs, and you've got this new force that's being built under Catherine. Now what's important here is the fact it was, as the Jesuits start to be undone or removed from European nations, it is Catherine that picks them up. Okay, the big chunk of them went to Corsica, but the elect went to Russia, invited by Catherine. All right, now it's very important that people understand this, because the Jesuits from this point on are under the control of something other than the Vatican. They're actually under the control of the very opposite, the opposing forces that are building at this time to the Vatican system. All right, so important that that's understood. We're not going to get into the ins and outs of how blah 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 blah. What I'm saying is this is showing you power, which is what's behind all this. This is the big houses, the big ancient old money houses that have been going on since Dot. These are the movements going on in the background. So the Vatican is being taken over. Now, they're not going to destroy, they didn't destroy the Vatican because they needed it. They needed the Vatican in order they could capture the titles that we are all operating under. Alright. The central banks are part of this other operation as well. Because it's through the central banks that eventually they managed to change your title into a birthing certificate, which is a title they own under Crown copyright, which has incorporated your Christian name with a surname, which is the surety then for the entire system of Caesar or commerce. So it's Rome the Empire as opposed to Rome the Church, to take them titles away from Rome. So it's important we understand that it took them until 1963 before they really changed the liturgy and theology of the Vatican with Vatican II, a complete 100% Jesuit construct. Are you seeing? So we've arrived at the point now where we can understand a bit about who Catherine is, what she represents, what happened in her reign, and now we're at the point where we can start to recognise that the Jesuits, post throwing out of the Vatican, was picked up by this new force. Okay, so the story so far. We've established that this woman, Catherine, was born in Prussia. Okay, she grew up as a Lutheran and changed into the Russian Orthodox. Okay, and more importantly, the Canaanite, the Khazarians, as a nation, was taken over by Russia in 1783. All right, so there's no surprise then that the pogroms were full of these people, who were then launched across America and Britain from 1888, stopped by an Act of Parliament in 1914-15, I think. Right, now the Jesuit. What do we know about the Jesuits of today? Well, first let's give it a little analogy. Because as a bloke, if you're a boy, a man, you did the 80s, you know exactly what I'm talking about with this. Generally, in general terms, the only time a man tries his best to get back in at exit is when he's been thrown out of a nightclub. Yeah, it's happened a lot. I remember it well. So in that instant of being thrust out and manhandled, the minute that exit door shuts, you might spend 10 minutes trying to get back in through that door with all your might that you can muster, because you want to kill these people because they've just thrown you out when you were tapping off. Anyway, so let's establish the term exit as equating with having been thrown out. No. Okay, the Jesuits today, their overall ethos is you have to be a man. Okay, that's their ethos. What kind of man is the question. Now, one thing we know that has established itself within the Catholic Church is sodomy, which is basically a man trying to get back in through the exit because he's been thrown out of something. So we can tie this sodomy agenda to this reformed and very odd group of people called the Jesuits from the 1700s. Okay, so you've got from the 1700s till 1814 when they're re-established. That's quite a long time, is it not? To completely reform this super powerful group of men that are determined, you know. So you change the top, the head of that organisation, and it is carrying out another agenda while keeping it hidden from the flock at the bottom and the lower ranking Jesuits. Because remember, we're dealing here with inner circle stuff here. There's inner circle, outer circle. That's the format. That's the pyramid. It's in everything that we now know today as reality. So these are the games of the inner circles. It doesn't necessarily mean that all those that have ever been a Jesuit, associated with a Jesuit or etc. has been operating this in full knowledge. It's not how it works, people. If it was so, then we would be overwrought with bad people. What we're overwrought with is lazy people, ignorant people that cannot be asked to check things out for themselves, that are happy to let things roll by, that they shouldn't. You know, this has happened because the flock didn't pull up the priests, you didn't pull up the bishops, you didn't pull up the archbishop, blah, blah, blah. When you've got hierarchy, that's how it works. If the top's going wrong and the bottom doesn't pull it back, it'll go wrong. So we've established now that this new Jesuit, this idea of a man, is to continually trying to get back in through the exit. So naturally that tells a lad like me that what's symbolically they're showing you that they know they've been thrown out subconsciously and they want to get back in. They can't get back in through the front door because they've been very naughty. They've been very naughty boys for a long time. So they keep trying to bang it back in through the exit. So there's your sodomy, there's your priesthood. That's how they've dissolved the Catholic Church. Now, for them to put all this effort into having to destroy that church as a body of something of meaning, it must have been quite a precious thing. Let's keep away the Roman Empire stuff off the fact. It's the guys in frocks who are nice people up against psychotic warriors. They don't stand a chance, do they? Especially if the flock is just not interested either and not recognising that it's all going tits up. Where did they have any support? The poor priests on their own had no support whatsoever. They were getting battered from the top, they were getting judged by the bottom. You can see how these games have worked out. Anyway, as it stands today, we are now under the Jesuits. But we're under a brand new Jesuit. And that is what's important that people need to understand. So I'm thinking there was a difference between the original Jesuit, albeit they had one job to perform, which was to oppose the Reformation. So naturally they're going to be opposed, seen as an enemy to anybody that's classed itself as Reformed. But in general terms, what they were trying to do was uphold the old church that everybody in Europe was a part of for many centuries. Let's keep that in mind as well. Something definitely changed in the Crusade times and what had been reformed at the high levels previous to the 1066 invasion in this nation. So on those terms, I just want to point out that the Jesuits that we can all now show in as responsible for a lot of this really powerful influence and length of arm in a global scene is a different Jesuit to the original. I would class Eric John Phelps as a part of this madness in order to obfuscate the fact that we're dealing with a different grouping, because most of it is so fire and brimstone. It's very reminiscent of your Pilgrim, very in sync with the Prussian kind of mindset. So I'm thinking Eric John Phelps, because a lot of his work can't be sourced. I know people accuse me of not sourcing a lot of work. I do source a lot of stuff. But what you've got to understand about me is the biggest body of my knowledge was gained in the mystery school in relation to history, understanding the philosophers, the Greek, the Hindu, the Buddhist, all the different cultures that I absorbed in those days. I gained from my reference library, from the books that I were gaining because I was connected into those networks because I was in the mystery school. So the books you wouldn't generally get as run of the mill. I had a great library. I had notes on everything I'd read and my taste of it, my impressions of it. And I was building up my body of knowledge in that respect. And, it was interesting how that sort of works. But in going against the system in a physical way, which I did from quite early on, that got me in a lot of trouble. And suffice to say, all that's gone. If I've got 20 books now, you'd be lucky. So a lot of the time I'm giving to you, I'm communicating to you the body of knowledge that I've come across, observed and experienced in my times during the mystery school when I was learning, opening my mind, realising myself. So I do apologise if sometimes you could be desperate for a source and I'm not giving it. I'm just giving you what I know. Sometimes I do source things because if it's something new, then it needs to be put out in the best ways for people to catch it. But also what I'm doing is this. I'm giving you an overall narrative as I understand this game. Go find it. Because it's there. I've seen it. I've read it. Yeah, I've seen it. It is there. And it needs to be found. And it needs to be brought into the public arena. I can't do everything. I am fantastic and amazing. I do accept that accolade. But I'm not here I've got enough on my plate. Have you any idea how busy I am? Just keeping this crap going for a start, it's just insane. So, you know, just be a bit more chilling. I'm not an academic, although I would consider myself at least on par. I'm just a normal guy that likes to play drums, who jumped into this by some kind of magic default way back. And here I am today carrying on, because it's important. And it's important that people do start to open their minds a bit. Because when you have the grammar to understand a certain thing that's going on, there's less chance of frustration to come to birth, which is a path to fear. And once you enter fear to a point, you're not open to study anything, because fear will prevent you. So I'm going to leave you with that. It's very important, this video, in relation to fully absorbing and to understand that just because we're talking Jesuit doesn't mean we're talking Catholic, you know? Just because you're talking Jew, you're not talking Hebrew. Do you know what I'm saying to you? Because you've got to grasp those aspects of information so that you can see a bit clearer as to who is the enemy. Because it's a mindset, you know, as opposed to a race. It's a mindset that can pick up any race, because it's all dependent on what's going on inside of you. That's where it's at, folks. It's all in you. So with that, I'm going to shut my gob, because it's Friday. I don't know what I'm going to do, but it's Friday anyway. So I'll leave you and say, till the next time.